America's democracy is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. And today, America's democracy stood.
This is a great day for the country. We're going to certify the election of Donald J. Trump as the 47th president. That's our focus today.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
Drama in Canada, not so much drama here in Washington. Hello, I'm Robert Costa, and welcome to America Decides. A winter storm here in Washington, burying the nation's capital in a lot of snow, but it was a serene political scene today on Capitol Hill, especially compared to 4 years ago, after that violent mob stormed the Capitol. Trump supporters taking the Hill to protest President Biden's win in the congressional certification. But 4 years later, today, lawmakers gathered inside a peaceful Capitol for a joint session of Congress. Vice President Kamala Harris overseeing the certification of her defeat to President-elect Trump, and she certified his victory, making it official. Let's start tonight with CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill. Scott, good to have you here. We've both covered January 6th and its aftermath for 4 years now. It was a different kind of scene today. As a reporter, how did you see the reality of governing and democracy play out today with the certification, as well as the echoes of what happened 4 years ago?
It was just as you described, Bob. It was serene. That's how it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to only take 30 minutes, be ministerial, be low-key. It's supposed to be the kind of thing that would make a poli-sci professor fall asleep because it's so dull and so dry. But don't mistake what you see on the screen there as the temperature behind the scenes. There is a tension that is palpable, that you can feel when you talk to sources, when you talk to staffers who were here that day, when you talk to police officers. This is all happening beneath a proverbial storm cloud, which still hangs over the Capitol. There is still resentment that there's been a whitewashing of January 6th, a denialism of the insurrection, including by the leaders of the House and the Senate who held no vigil today honoring the victims, who've yet to hang the plaque to honor police heroes that is required under law here at the Capitol for January 6th, and who did not issue statements today marking the 4-year turnout of January 6th and marking the victims. Bob, there is still a palpable frustration.
Well, there might be, for sure, among some of the lawmakers you've spoken to. But I'm curious, Scott, when you're talking to Democrats and perhaps some Republicans, maybe the traditional Republicans who aren't in love with President-elect Trump, how do they reckon with the fact that 4 years ago there was an attack on the U.S. Capitol following a rally led by then-President Trump, but 4 years later he had a commanding victory in the November election? Republicans hold majorities, albeit narrow majorities, in the House and the Senate, and he now is about to head back into the White House with what his party would argue is a mandate to govern and to use his power, to not be rebuked, but to be given power again and congressional majorities. How are your sources dealing with that dynamic, which is very real here in this country?
I think that's right. I mean, there's a mandate given to Donald Trump from the voters, and I think both parties are acknowledging that declaratively right now. But on the issue of January 6th, on this day, when it's uniquely relevant, when it's uniquely part of the conversation, the contrast in messaging is about as Venus and Mars as you can get, Bob. If you line up your local congressman, if he or she's a Democrat, you are likely to find he or she issued a statement marking the 4 years since January 6, 2021, the police heroes and the victims. If your congressman or woman is a Republican and you look up what he or she said today, it's likely he or she made a statement about their pride in certifying an election for Donald Trump. They're just on different wavelengths on what's important to talk about today. And if they're not agreeing on the topic, if they're not agreeing on the points that are relevant for the public on this day, at this moment, that shows you how polarized Congress is, no matter how serene and calm and by the book today's proceedings were.
Let's listen, Scott, to something that's pretty notable today. As you noted, that it's ceremonial ministerial role for the vice president, but whether it's Richard Nixon in 1961, Al Gore in 2001, these are moments that are often painful for the vice president who has just been defeated in an election to have to oversee the certification of their recent rival. But Vice President Harris did just that today with a calmness, according to my sources who were on the floor watching her, a steadiness. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I do believe very strongly that America's democracy is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. Every single person, their willingness to fight for and respect the importance of our democracy. Otherwise, it is very fragile, and it will not be able to withstand moments of crisis. And today, America's democracy stood.
Scott, final thoughts on her and this moment?
Yeah, there are a number of House Democrats that came up to me and said how proud they were of how Vice President Harris handled this, but also any number of folks who were here that day, barricaded in offices, police who were wounded, who say they're just grateful it's peaceful and that nobody tried anything on this day.
Scott McFarlane, as ever, reporting on January 6th, Congress and American democracy. We appreciate you, Scott, and your insights on this day of all days. Meanwhile, CBS News political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Caitlin, good to be with you. You're in a bit of a warmer climate. Lucky you. I know it's not easy to be on the road, but we appreciate you being there, and I'm at least glad you got some nice weather. Caitlin, let's begin with Susie Wiles, the incoming White House chief of staff. She rarely speaks to the press. This is someone whom President-elect Trump has referred to as, quote, the ice maiden, someone who's pretty tough in his view behind the scenes and staving away chaos inside Trump's inner circle. Let's pull up on the screen what she said to Axios and to reporter Mark Caputo in a rare interview. She said, quote, I have every hope that the 47 administration will not have the same number of attempts to put sand in the gears. And what's the mood down there in Mar-a-Lago and around Mar-a-Lago about Susie Wiles and her determination to not have a repeat of what happened in 2017 when, to be frank, it seemed like every Friday night someone else was being fired from the White House?
Yeah, Bob, good to be with you. I know I drew the short straw in coming here to South Florida during a snowstorm, so hope you guys are staying nice and safe and warm in that snow globe up there. But you're right, Susie Wiles has been someone who has stayed behind the scenes. You'll remember from the election night victory, Trump called her up to say some words, and she didn't want any of the spotlight. And she gave this interview to Mark Caputo, a longtime Florida-based reporter, great reporter. And in it, she really stressed kind of what she wants this White House to look like and to run under her leadership, and wants it to mirror how it went on the campaign. And notable in that interview, she says she doesn't, if anybody is trying to be a solo act or think only about themselves, they are not welcome in that White House. And from my reporting, talking to staffers on the campaign, many of them are coming to the White House because of Susie Wiles and wanting to be under her leadership again. When she was announced, the staff was really ecstatic about this. And something to understand about her, too, it's not so much that she really holds the reins tight over Trump. She lets him lean into his instincts, and a lot of those on the campaign believed that his instincts were correct. It's more so that there is a high level of trust between Trump and Susie Wiles that existed throughout the campaign and is expected to exist in this White House, a level of trust that, we hadn't really seen with previous chiefs of staff, and that, had shown through on the campaign as well.
What else is going on down in Florida? There's so much attention now in Washington, Caitlin, to the snow, as you mentioned, to the congressional certification, to the late President Jimmy Carter and his upcoming visit, his casket to Washington, where thousands of Americans will certainly file through the Capitol. What about down in Florida? What's the chatter down there? Open your notebook. Yeah,
Bob, what really stands out to me is how kind of peaceful and quiet it is here as well, and what a difference 4 years and an election victory makes. Donald Trump has been at his resort in Mar-a-Lago sending out messages on Truth Social. He's actually expected to go to Washington, D.C. later this week to attend the funeral of the late Jimmy Carter, the former president. And then later in the week, he's expected to, and throughout the weekend, have various members of the Republican conference, Republican lawmakers down here to his Florida resort, his Mar-a-Lago resort, to talk about the agenda ahead, various factions of the House GOP. And that is kind of a signal of, how he wants or how he's placing a premium on governing. Remember, he has a House majority, but a very, very narrow one. We saw the consequences of that through the past few weeks on not only the speaker fight, but on the budget resolution as well. And they're also looking forward down here in Mar-a-Lago to confirmation hearings, which are expected to start as early as next week with some of those high-profile picks for Trump's cabinet. And there's a feeling of confidence in these picks that may not have existed, maybe a month or so ago. There's a confidence that these picks are going to be confirmed.
Caitlin Huey-Burns in Florida reporting for CBS. Thank you. President Biden visiting New Orleans today after last week's deadly New Year's Day attack. He's meeting with the victims' families. Our Omar Villafranca is on Bourbon Street with the latest on that sad investigation.
The ATF confirms that they found explosive substances in Jabbar's home in Houston, but also at the Airbnb he rented here in New Orleans. They also shared video that they say was recorded by Jabbar on a camera that was on glasses like this one. They were Meta glasses, and they showed Jabbar riding down the street on a bicycle on Bourbon Street here in the French Quarter. They also told us that he came to New Orleans and this area in October and November of 2024, just months before the attack. Now, the president and the first lady, they're going to meet with victims and family members, but we understand they're also going to be talking to city officials about security. Why security now? Because Mardi Gras season is started. As you hear behind me right now, Bourbon Street is alive, and it is well, and it is Mardi Gras season. So the first parades that are coming through are not big, small walking parades, but there is going to be increased security, according to the mayor, for those small parades. Robert?
Omar Villafranca, thank you. Election certification, former President Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump's inauguration, all of that coming up ahead. We'll speak with a national security contributor for CBS, Sam Vinograd, about the state of security in the district as Washington deals with all of these upcoming events. You're watching America Decides. Officials in Washington, D.C. are now amplifying security across the nation's capital for the series of prominent events happening this month. In addition to today's election certification, we have the funeral services coming up for former President Jimmy Carter. That's happening in Washington throughout this week as he lies in state at the Capitol. There's also, of course, the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump, January 20th, taking place exactly 2 weeks from today. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins us now. Great to see you, Sam. As we all know, you formerly served as Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism for the Department of Homeland Security, and you've been tracking issues like this for a long time. Sam, what do you make of this really busy January for federal officials as they try to keep Washington safe?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the threat environment has actually become even more complex since the insurrection on January 6th at the Capitol. Since that time, we've had a proliferation in domestic terrorism attacks here in this country, but all enhanced threat from foreign terrorist organizations and state-sponsored terror organizations as well. What that has led to is really an alphabet soup of terrorist organizations seeking to do harm to this country. And that is why the federal government over the past several months, if not the past several years, has really stepped up two things, Bob. And the first is information sharing. That includes bulletins both to the public and to law enforcement partners about what to watch out for, like copycat vehicular ramming attacks, as well as, in addition to enhanced information sharing, trying to form new partnerships with law enforcement associations, new partnerships with faith-based entities, and more to try to ensure that they can secure not just the Capitol over the month of January, but the country.
Sam, what about the impact of the weather here? You have snow across Washington.
Well, I think counterterrorism officials somewhat breathe a sigh of relief when there is inclement weather. Snow is certainly a deterrent, and the windy conditions we had earlier today. Snow is certainly a deterrent to large groups of individuals seeking to mobilize to violence, but we can't always count on the weather. And that's why federal authorities working with their state and local partners have been preparing for months for the slew of events that we have happening here in Washington, D.C. in the month of January. Preparations both for the inauguration as well as for the certification today have been ongoing for a long period of time, well before anybody knew that it was going to be a snowstorm today.
And what about the impact of the New Orleans terror attack? What does that mean as officials think through what's happening in the coming weeks?
Unfortunately, the New Orleans terror attack was really just an example of what officials have been warning about for years, which is the threat of a lone actor or a small group of individuals who radicalize and mobilize to violence using easily accessible assets like a car. In the aftermath of that attack, what officials are most concerned about is copycat attacks. Individuals inspired and motivated by what they saw in New Orleans, the high-profile nature of the attack, the high impact nature of the attack, being inspired to use that horrific incident as a motivation for their own actions. So officials are on high alert for the threat of vehicular ramming and likely are revisiting security protocols to make sure there's enough barricades in place to prevent any sort of similar incident from occurring here in D.C.
Sam Vinograd, thank you very much. We appreciate it. President-elect Donald Trump seeking to delay sentencing for his conviction in the New York hush money case. Judge Juan Merchan has ordered the president-elect to appear in person or virtually to be sentenced this Friday. Lawyers for Trump in a court filing today argue that all deadlines should be suspended as his appeals move forward. But the judge seems, just in the final few minutes of this afternoon, to have said to Trump's lawyers, we're still moving forward. As you might recall, Trump was convicted of a criminal conviction of those hush money payments related to them back in May of 2004. Political reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman is here with us for analysis. Katrina, we just seen a bulletin of news about Judge Merchan around the 5 p.m. Eastern hour here on Monday. What's going on with this trial and the sentencing?
So this is not that surprising, but Judge Juan Merchan has now said that he is denying Trump's request to stay the sentencing, which was just imposed on Friday. It's now set for January 10th in the morning, but Trump has made it clear that he is going to use every avenue possible, per usual, to try and prevent the sentencing from happening. So we are expecting more appeals to be filed in the appellate court. What he has done so far, though, is brought what's called an Article 78 proceeding against Judge Merchan. And that's basically a civil action against Merchan, saying that he has gone outside the scope of his authorities in making decisions specifically related to the presidential immunity ruling, on which basis Trump says that this entire case should be thrown out, that the sentencing should be delayed. He has said that the case should be dismissed on the basis of the fact that he has now been elected president. And he also argues that presidential immunity should not just apply once you're in office, but during this transitional period of being president-elect.
So, Katrina, can President-elect Trump actually be sentenced to prison time? What do we know about what the judge is willing to do or not in this case?
So the judge, in his filing on Friday, what he said is that he doesn't plan to incarcerate Donald Trump. He doesn't see that as the right avenue anymore. The prosecution isn't even asking for it. What he indicated is that he's leaning towards what's called an unconditional discharge. That means that Trump could walk away. There would be no confinement. There would be no fine. There would be no probation. He would be free, although he would still be a convicted felon. And I think it's also notable that Merchan is trying to make this also as hard as possible for Trump to argue the sentencing shouldn't take place. He's already saying ahead of time, I'm not planning to put you in jail. He's also given Trump the option of appearing virtually, which is very rare for that to happen in New York court. And also from filing we saw from the prosecution, it sounds like that's what Trump has indicated he plans to do if this takes place Friday, is to appear virtually.
Katrina Kaufman, great to see you. Thank you for stopping by and sharing your reporting. We'll see what happens with that sentencing.
Thank you, Bob.
The president-elect and health care, what's the future on that front? We'll have more on that and what's going on inside the House of Representatives coming up on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, long history of opposing President-elect Donald Trump. She spoke with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation this past Sunday about whether Democrats should work with him during his second term.
During the first Trump presidency, as Speaker, you took very public stands to challenge Donald Trump when he was president. Democrats now are in the minority in this new Congress. Tom Suozzi from New York recently said it would be a mistake for Democrats to reflexively oppose Trump's ideas and brand themselves a national resistance movement. This is a Democrat who won in a Trump district, and he's warning fellow Democrats. Do you agree resistance is a bad strategy this time?
Well, let me just say, historically, when I became Speaker, it was when I ran with a Republican president, George Bush, and we opposed his policies. He wanted to privatize Social Security. And so we went against that, and we won. And then when I won again as Speaker, Donald Trump was president. And we ran against him by saying we're going to save the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. This is it. We were saving Social Security in the beginning. Now we're saving the Affordable Care Act. So we won the majority, yes, by disagreeing on certain points. That doesn't mean you disagree on every issue, no. But it does mean that you protect the values that bring you to Congress, the vision that you have about health care, the values that you have about health care again, because health care is an issue that is so important because the health care costs are so high that it affects whether you can have housing, whether you can have food on the table and the rest. And so
you would encourage Democrats to work with Donald Trump on an issue like health care?
Well, I don't know that he wants to be on health care.
Are there opportunities to work with him on anything?
No, there have been other issues. No, on health care, no. But we worked with George Bush on many issues, several issues, let me say. And no, I don't say that we should work with him on health care. I'm saying we are out there to protect the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. He said Obamacare sucks. Now, that's not something we want to work with, that Obamacare sucks. So we want to be out there to save the Affordable Care Act and recognize that reducing the cost of health care can enable people to have housing, have food on the table, and the rest. And there are studies that show the relationship between ability to have housing and food when you have good, affordable care.
Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi with Margaret Brennan right there. Here in Washington, former President Jimmy Carter, his remains will be flown to Washington tomorrow, where he will lay in state at the Capitol. Today, mourners in Atlanta, Georgia, have been paying their respects to the 39th president. Carter is there at the Carter Center, his casket, people walking by saying a prayer. The funeral service will be held at the Washington National Cathedral on Thursday. That will happen before his remains are ultimately brought home to his home in Plains, Georgia, for his burial. Carter died last month at age 100. The new White House Chief of Staff, as we discuss, says she's going to try to leave that drama that still kind of lingers over the Trump story from 2017 at the door. What Susie Wiles is saying and whether she can get it done. We'll talk about all of that coming up next on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. So, in early 2017, reporters covering the Trump White House encountered a lot of chaos. It seemed like President Trump at the time was a total outsider adjusting to Washington, and there was acrimony at times among those who were at the highest ranks of his White House staff. Will there be a repeat this time around? Well, Susie Wiles, the incoming White House chief of staff, told Axios, "My team will not tolerate backbiting, second-guessing, inappropriately, or drama. These are counterproductive to the mission." That's what she told Mark Caputo. Let's bring in our political panel, Kadia Goba and Molly Ball. Kadia is a political reporter for Semaphore. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Great to have both of you here. Kadia, let's begin with you. Susie Wiles is now installing all of her allies inside these key White House positions. Is this her White House? And if you cross her, watch out?
I mean, I think if you talk to anyone in the incoming administration, they'll say that Susie Wiles is a steady hand and she means what she says. However, I would argue that she doesn't have total control of the incoming president, because the problem is that he will have certain allies that will have access or untethered access to him, and that could be problematic. Those are the issues that she's going to have to worry about. Obviously, she will, try to guard him, I would imagine, but there are different people who have different access to him, and that is probably what brings the chaos.
Molly, you wrote a terrific book about former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. You heard her comments on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan talking about how Democrats are going to handle this crossroads for their party and the incoming Trump presidency. What's your latest reporting on her and Democrats as they look toward the inaugural address of Trump and everything to come?
Well, former Speaker Pelosi, of course, is no longer the leader of the Democratic Party, but I think what you heard from her there has always been her perspective, that the proper way to be the sort of loyal opposition is to oppose where you see fit, particularly when it comes to making the argument on policy. And that was what we saw the Democrats under Pelosi do during the first Trump administration. We see the Democratic Party now trying to be much more careful, much more deliberate, and to really pick their battles more than they feel like they did in 2017. Not necessarily Pelosi, but the Democratic Party writ large was in sort of full resistance mode during the first Trump administration. They opposed absolutely everything about him, and many of the Democrats who would go on to run for president in 2020 prided themselves on having, for example, voted against every single one of his cabinet nominees. There's a sense now that, first of all, his victory this time was much more decisive, but second, that they don't necessarily gain anything by being seen as hysterical and just going against everything for the sake of opposition. So I think we are going to see a Democratic Party that tries to be much more judicious, and thanks to the narrow margins, particularly in the House, the Republicans are going to have to work with them at least on some things. So they will have some leverage, and they will have a voice in the coming months and years.
Kadia, is the Republican Party fully united now on its strategy when it comes to legislation? There has been debate about whether to put everything in one big bill, the border legislation, couple it together with the tax legislation and make it all be able to be passed through what's called reconciliation or a simple majority. There's also been talk about splitting it into two because it's going to be too complicated to get a consensus on some sort of massive bill. What are you hearing behind the scenes?
I think some of the murmurs you hear right now, as you point out, that Republicans are split on how they'll move forward. This is sort of an indication about what is to come. I do not think as far as my reporting, they do not have a consensus on how they're going to proceed with the administration's agenda. But I think some of that has a lot to do with people coming from the administration, the incoming administration, and how they are posturing or talking to certain reps or maybe talking to the Senate and not necessarily the House. So they are House divided. What at hand right now, House Republicans feel like they need to do one all-encompassing bill because they fear they won't be able to push through Trump's tax agenda. If they split it, they feel like the best option is to combine that with immigration so that it is a sweetener already at hand, so they don't have to worry about some of the holdouts who think that, a massive tax plan is just too expensive. So that's kind of what they're up against. It's going to be interesting with a small majority. Everyone has an opportunity to break ranks with the party. And it'll be interesting to see how they accomplish this.
Molly, what's your assessment of the difference between now and 2017, not just in terms of Susie Wiles, but the whole Trump operation?
As I wrote about Speaker Mike Johnson last week, the vibes are better, but the math is worse. You have a Republican Party right now that is as unified and confident and optimistic as I have ever seen it in my decades of political reporting. On the other hand, they do have very narrow margins in Congress, much more narrow than they did in 2017. So it's going to be much harder, to Kadia's point, to get anything done on a party line basis. The major accomplishment of Trump's first year in office, if not his entire first term, was that 2017 tax cut bill. And they lost several Republicans on that bill. They're now trying to do something much bigger and more ambitious, and they cannot lose literally a single vote, at least as currently constituted. So while the Republicans, I think, are much more unified and confident and focused, and you have a Trump administration that's also far more focused and intentional in the way that they've been going about this transition. On the other hand, there are so many obstacles ahead for this agenda that they want to accomplish because of the legislative math in Congress. And for that reason, I think you're going to see most of the action in the in the coming months be on executive orders, on foreign policy, on things that Trump can do without Congress, because it's just going to take a long time for Congress to get going to where they can actually get started on passing some of this legislation.
We'll have to see what happens. I know you'll both be reporting on all of it with excellence. Kadia Goba and Molly Ball, two of the best. Thank you. We appreciate it. 19 people in recent days were awarded the nation's highest civilian honor by President Joe Biden. Notable recipients of the Presidential Medal of Freedom include former First Lady Hillary Clinton, Oscar-winning actor Denzel Washington, Grammy-winning songwriter Bono of U2, Jane Goodall, famous for her work with animals and in zoology, Los Angeles Lakers legend Magic Johnson, and Vogue editor-in-chief Anna Wintour. President Biden said all of these recipients have left, quote, an incredible mark on our country. After President Biden blocked the sale of U.S. steel, President-elect Trump says his tariffs will strengthen the struggling company. You're watching America Decides. U.S. Steel now suing the Biden administration over the president's recent decision to block the company's billion-dollar acquisition, $15 billion to be precise, by Japan's Nippon Steel. Biden has cited national security concerns, while President-elect Trump is also weighing in on that decision. He posted on social media today, quote, "Why would they want to sell U.S. Steel now when tariffs will make it a much more profitable and valuable company?" So he's arguing in favor of helping the U.S. Steel with his own policies. We'll see what happens. International investment expert Sarah Bowerly-Danzeman joins us now. She's an associate professor at Indiana University's School of International Studies, also a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for being with us. The White House is citing national security concerns. Do you buy that as an academic, an analyst? And what's the story here in terms of the politics and the economics?
Well, thank you so much for having me today, Robert. The Biden administration's position is that a domestically owned and operated steel industry is vital national security, a vital national security interest, because steel is such a critical input to so much of our economy. And he's also arguing that since U.S. Steel is neither the only nor the largest manufacturer of steel in the U.S., that selling any American steel company to any foreign investor must be a national security risk that has to be blocked. And I think that this is perhaps a different way of thinking about national security than we have thought about it before, at least through the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which reviewed this transaction.
Why has U.S. Steel wanted in recent months and years to be sold? What are what's its economic situation, its business climate, and what is the backstory of this entire possible sale?
Yes, so U.S. Steel is looking for a buyer because it really needs to have an injection of capital in order to really upgrade its capabilities, to increase capacity. We know that over the last several years, steel has been in the news quite a bit, starting with President Trump in his first term putting in place tariffs on steel. And that really, in some respects, helped to revitalize steel production in the United States. But there's a difference between being able to sell more steel and being able to have the money to invest in upgrading your facilities. This is a capital-intensive process. And so U.S. Steel saw Nippon Steel's bid for its business as the best it could get, and was really excited for Nippon to come in and invest billions in upgrading facilities, expanding production throughout North America.
President-elect Trump posted on social media about his tariff proposals, and he argues that he can help make U.S. Steel profitable. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, President Trump certainly likes his tariffs, and tariffs can accomplish many things, but they can't accomplish everything. As I'm sure your viewers know, tariffs raise the local price of the targeted good, which allows less efficient companies to compete. But there's decades of solid research that shows that companies that benefit from tariffs tend to underinvest in productivity-enhancing capital improvements. So I'm skeptical of the idea that all that we need are more tariffs to revitalize this industry and get U.S. Steel back on stronger footing.
And just quickly, could U.S. Steel be on stronger footing if this deal goes through? What's your view?
Well, I certainly think that U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel are arguing that. They're currently, as you mentioned at the top, are suing the government for failing to provide due process rights here. They're also suing the president of the United Steelworkers, Cleveland-Cliffs, which is a U.S. competitor who had a competing offer for U.S. Steel, as well as Cleveland-Cliffs' CEO. And they're alleging that these entities and individuals colluded to try to prevent the sale. So it should be a very interesting road ahead as we see how the courts, how this plays out in the courts.
Politics and a lot of litigation ahead. Sarah Bowerly-Dansman, really appreciate you coming by and talking with us about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert.
CBS News has learned the Pentagon has reached a settlement with over 35,000 gay and lesbian veterans who were dismissed because of their sexual orientation. Under this agreement, the veterans who were denied an honorable discharge will be eligible for an immediate review. This would allow them to access a range of benefits. They can also be reissued paperwork that eliminates any reference to their sexual orientation in a more streamlined process. It's been more than a decade since the military lifted its ban on openly gay and lesbian soldiers.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader.
Justin Trudeau, Canada's prime minister, announces his resignation following party pressure. How President-elect Trump's threat of tariffs and making Canada a state might have played a role. We'll see. You're watching America Decides. Justin Trudeau's 9 years as Canadian Prime Minister is coming to an end. Today, he announced he will step down as the leader of the governing Liberal Party.
The fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
The embattled Prime Minister went on to say Canada's Parliament will be suspended until March 24th while a new leader of his party is chosen. I want to bring in Mackenzie Gray. He is a national reporter for Canada's Global News. Thanks for joining us. Take us behind the scenes here. Prime Minister Trudeau has been this major force on the Canadian political scene, the global political scene, for a long time, many, many years now. What led inside his own party to this ouster?
Really, it's been bad polling numbers. For about a year now, Mr. Trudeau has been behind the Conservative Party, and those numbers have grown substantially. In the past few months, the Liberals projected to, in the next election, which will take place in 2025, potentially lose by between 20 and 25 points, get absolutely wiped out in the House of Commons, Canadian Parliament, and potentially be not the first party, not the second party, not the third party, the fourth party in Parliament. So there was really a mutiny from Liberal members of Parliament to tell Justin Trudeau he needed to quit. And Mr. Trudeau quit today in the face of potentially more resignations from Cabinet. A few weeks ago, he lost his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, who quit just hours before a big fall economic statement, kind of like a budget here in Canada. That was a major blow to Trudeau, who had not talked to Canadians since the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, his former Deputy Prime Minister, until today, when he announced that he intends to leave after the Liberal Party announces a new leader, likely sometime in March.
As you noted, Trudeau has faced tough poll numbers for a long time. He's also faced scrutiny over his handling of the relationship with the United States. He went down to Mar-a-Lago to see President-elect Donald Trump, and Trump has taunted him ever since, saying that Trudeau should become the governor of Canada, and Canada should consider being annexed by the United States. How did that Trump factor play into how Liberal Party members saw the Prime Minister and his position?
It certainly didn't help the situation. These 51st state tweets, all of these things that Donald Trump has been talking about, has kind of underscored the line that many in the Conservative Party here in Canada, the official opposition, have been saying needs to have for an election to happen, because Mr. Trudeau is at the end of his mandate here. There is a scheduled election to happen in 2025. And with Mr. Trudeau at the end and having low polling numbers, many analysts have been focusing on the fact that maybe Donald Trump's looking right past Justin Trudeau and focusing on Pierre Poilievre, who's the Conservative leader, someone that Elon Musk has been tweeting about, someone that Joe Rogan is talking about, someone that in conservative American circles has been starting to gain some traction. So Trump's tweets, Trump's taunts really did not help Mr. Trudeau, who was already in a weak position. And there was a lot of concern and angst here in Canada about the potential for these 25% tariffs to be levied on Canadian goods going to the U.S. Estimates up here would see a potential 5% GDP cut in the Canadian economy, a potential disaster for Canada.
And briefly, for those Americans who are not paying close attention to Canadian politics, give us a glimpse inside the Conservative Party in Canada, which seems rather excited in recent days about their chances in the next Canadian election and about their leader.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservative Party. As I mentioned, there's been many Americans who've been really pushing it forward, trying to look past Trudeau, pushing Mr. Poilievre forward. And if the polls hold up now, he basically win a supermajority in the House of Commons here in Canada. He could win one of the biggest electoral victories in Canadian history. But they have really been running on a platform that's very anti-Trudeau, saying that Mr. Trudeau has broken everything. So today is a bit of a setback for them. They were certainly hoping to run against Mr. Trudeau in the next election, and that next election is likely to happen relatively soon, probably sometime in April. So there's likely a new prime minister coming in then. And of course, Canada is hosting the G7 this year. So it will be a big question if Donald Trump comes up to meet the likely new prime minister at that point in time in Pierre Poilievre in the Conservative Party.
A lot to happen in Canadian politics between now and then, if that possibility ever emerges. Mackenzie Gray, thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it.
It was the warmest thing I had in the closet, so I decided to wear it.
What a scene earlier today inside Washington, D.C. That was a snowball fight, a district tradition after the Capitol was hit by its biggest snowstorm in years. And even the new pandas at the zoo were able to enjoy the snow. You might remember the two giant pandas arrived in Washington back in October. That snow got us thinking about how presidents throughout history have enjoyed that rare snowstorm in Washington, D.C. First Lady Jill Biden posted this photo from the White House residence this morning at their cat Willow, looking out at the snow. There are images of President Carter, the late President Carter, sledding at Camp David during peace talks with foreign leaders, and former President Ronald Reagan built a snowman with his grandson, George H.W. Bush. He was with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 90s in the snow, and President Barack Obama shared time with his daughters in a snowball fight. That does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.